Right, let's kick off. Hi everyone, welcome back to another virtual event with Glyptis. Thank you for joining us. If you don't know who we are Web3's gamified hiring platform, helping people all over the world find jobs in the space and supporting some of the very best employers in our industry. Now, as we all know, Web3 is rapidly reshaping industries, but one of the biggest challenges remains. Where do we find the next generation of talent? Today, we'll explore the key role that universities and hackathons play in expanding the Web3 workforce. Are universities keeping up with industry demands? How can hackathons help identify and nurture top talent? And what can students do to break into the space? Joining me are two experts in Web3 talent and people strategy, Danielle and Georgina. They will share their insights on how companies, universities, and individuals can all work together to build a strong and sustainable pipeline of Web3 talent. With that, I'll throw over to Georgina for a quick introduction.
Thank you, Callum, and thanks for having me on the panel today. I'm Georgina, but I also go by Gina, and I'm responsible for all things talent and hiring here at Ramp Network. So my role remit includes recruitment across the organisation, as well as employment branding, which includes events, partnerships with universities, which I'll talk a bit about later, and delivering any training that relates to hiring, really focused on kind of finding and then nurturing that top talent. And for those of you who haven't heard of Ramp Network, a little bit about us. So we are building the infrastructure to seamlessly connect Web3 with today's global financial systems. So we have our core on and off ramp products, and we provide businesses and individuals across over 150 countries with a streamlined and smooth experience in converting between crypto and fiat currencies. And we're kind of fully integrated with world major payment methods, including debit, credit cards, bank transfers, Apple Pay, Google Pay, and more. I won't list them all.
Awesome. I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. I am Danielle Skinner. I am the people lead at Foundation and also Rodeo, which is our newer product. I'm based in California, and I've spent a lot of time during my career in recruiting at universities, partnering with students. And right now we have a few initiatives at Foundation that we're spearheading with folks at universities who are specifically interested in getting into the Web3 space. So definitely excited to get into all of that today.
Thank you both very much. Very pleased to have you here. I'm going to start off with a bit of a broader question. How do you currently recruit early career talent into Web3? And Danielle, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I'll jump right in there. I think this is a really interesting question because I think a lot of companies face situations where we're either not quite ready to hire early career talent, or if we are, it's like pulling them in creative ways, like potentially internships, contractor roles. And I think that can be difficult for students to navigate at times because that's not the most traditional path for them to take during or straight out of school in terms of jumping into something that is a little bit more flexible or part-time. But I think what it really comes down to is just making sure that, we're holding true to a lot of general recruiting principles, like, of course, just making sure that we're building relationships. We have a culture that attracts people from the groups that we're targeting, like university students, and then just making sure that you're kind of creating that bridge for them to come from their campus setting into the corporate or even startup setting, which is where I am right now as a pretty early stage startup. And so I think just helping them kind of establish themselves into their careers is a huge start. And I think a few ways that you can do that is, of course, just being really explicit with them about, expectations, how they can best prepare, how they can best show up with more senior leaders, how they can best kind of explore the space to really ramp themselves up into the industry. And so I think a second, key thing there is also the education aspect, not a university education, but a Web3 education. So ensuring that something that we do with folks who are starting their careers in Web3 is often giving them resources that they can kind of like dive into at their own time. So it's like a playbook or a checklist for like, hey, here are some Web3 tools or apps that you should download and go play around with, like familiarize yourself with the space. And I think for students, this is where I've personally been able to connect to them the most, is when they are in there experimenting and trying things and like demonstrating that they are eager to learn and they're open and they're agile and like they're, you know, passionate or excited about this space. So meeting them kind of where they are, giving them tools to ramp up, bringing them into a culture that's going to set them up for success. I think all of that is going to lead to the best case scenario. And then that's stuff that can start while they're in school. So even if it is we're on campus partnering with the blockchain club, or we're here, you know, talking to students in a particular program, kind of starting to plant those seeds of like, hey, these are some things you should be thinking about if you want a career in the space, or if you want to talk in 4 years once you've graduated, like let's stay in touch and make sure that, you know, we're kind of building a relationship. So again, I think a lot of traditional talent lovers, but then also understanding that like for students, it is a little bit more of a unique experience, and they need to kind of be guided in a way that's not going to be confusing, because let's face it, Web3 can be confusing if you're new to the space. So that's where I would leave things there.
Yeah, and a lot of what you said, Danielle, actually kind of resonates with like us and where we're at Ramp Network. So kind of given the size of our organization and our current level of maturity, it means that we do at the moment need candidates with at least a couple of years of commercial experience. I think that's quite common in startups, that kind of correlation between size and the number of kind of graduate talent opportunities. That being said, though, we do partner a lot with universities. For example, London Business School. You mentioned blockchain clubs, Danielle, so we do a lot of work with their blockchain club as well. And we work with their MBA programs, because those are individuals that have had some commercial experience and have dipped back into academia, and we can help them navigate that transition from maybe Web 2 roles into the Web 3 space. But what I always say to kind of students are really interested in this space is, you know, it's so community driven. So, you know, start joining those blockchain clubs, start looking for those events, look at those meetups, you know, really immerse in the space. And because that really shines through as well when it comes to the recruitment and interview process.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
Brilliant answers. I think it's not just new people to the space that are still are confused, Danielle.
That's true.
So you've both spoken about and have experience hiring from universities or working with universities. Gina, what is the current state of Web3 education in universities? And do you think that they're keeping pace with the evolution of Web3 or somewhat lagging?
So this is a really interesting question. And I think with any embryonic field, there is always a bit of a lag when it comes to education, although we can see kind of movement being made in the space. So my insight is kind of somewhat limited in terms of countries, but I can speak to what the UK offers. So I know that there are examples like of MSCs in blockchain technologies. I know University of East London does one, and Queen Mary University of London. And I know there are some in the US, Massachusetts, Harvard, California, and I'm sure there's so many more that I'm not aware of. And there definitely are a few kind of notable professors teaching in the space as well, like Christian Catalini, Dan Bonnet, Jarrett Vorm, just to name kind of a few. But there are not as many degrees and professors out there yet, if you kind of compare it in a direct ratio to kind of all the degrees out there. But what I have seen, and Danielle and myself have touched on this already, is that many of these universities have established a blockchain club or a blockchain like society. And we work really closely with these kind of clubs and societies. So I suppose to summarize, we are kind of seeing these green shoots of Web3 education. But what is more established is those Web3 crypto communities created at these institutions. And I actually think that speaks more widely to a recurring theme that we have of communities and connection that we see in Web3. I mean, at Ramp Network, we're all about connecting and building that bridge for users to seamlessly move from Web2 to Web3. And I mean, Calyptus, you're all about building that community of top talent interested in Web3. So yeah, I think community is very much at the heart of it.
Yeah, I'll jump in with some thoughts there too. I mean, I think one thing that's particularly interesting about where students are at with, you know, their level of what access they have, I guess, to education in the Web3 space is what, from my experience and what I've seen, primarily focused on the technical aspect. And so blockchain clubs, like Georgina said, and I think a lot of the related majors or classes are focusing on blockchain from a technical perspective. So I think one thing that I would be curious to see, and I'm biased here because our product is focused on digital art, and we have Rodeo, which is our newer product, is a creative social network that uses blockchain technology under the hood, but from the front end is essentially a social media app. And so I think that when we communicate kind of our mission and vision with students, there is a little bit of like, oh, that's different than, what they've spent time looking at or thinking about when they think about blockchain. So I think to Georgina's point of like community, even breaking out of just the technical aspect for students and kind of, whether it's diving into kind of social networks on their own time or communities on their own time where they can explore the space, I think there would be a huge benefit there of making sure that they're branching out and trying different products, trying different apps, and understanding all of the use cases that blockchain can have, because I think it's been really eye-opening when we've been able to kind of have that conversation of like, you don't necessarily have to work in finance if you're interested in the space or something related. Like there's kind of a new generation of Web3 products that are coming to light, and the companies that are hiring students, of course, are going to reflect that. So I think that's another thing that haven't seen yet in terms of what students are being taught and studying, but I think would be like extremely beneficial, and I hope will begin to be introduced, if it hasn't already, within the next few years.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think for me, there probably should be more focus on practical Web3 applications as opposed to the theory, which I think a lot of time is spent on in the courses that I've read about, at least. And on that note, how do you think universities can balance teaching the fundamentals of the technology whilst also addressing the fact that Web3 does move incredibly quickly?
So I'm happy to jump in first here. Yeah, this kind of speaks a lot to what you both have been talking about. But I think, at the start, you do need to kind of that strong foundation, teaching the fundamentals. But then I think it's really important to have not just kind of the theory. So I would say that, universities should have also consider, recommended modules that can kind of evolve and change and keep up with the trends in Web3 and show the different ways and different industries you can kind of enter. And I also think even more work can be done, like partnering with industry experts. I know both Danielle and I, with our companies, we go to universities, but I think really, having even a module where industry experts come in, there's guest lecturers, they really, show opportunity, show what like day-to-day work can look like. And then on top of that, kind of thinking more on the hands-on, like, hackathons, workshops, really offer that hands-on learning. And I also think offer like interdisciplinary modules. So you don't necessarily have to take your degree in like, blockchain technology. You could do something else. And then there's optional modules in this, because if you think Web3 intersects with so many different fields, there's like finance, legal, compliance, commercial. If I think of all our roles at Ramp, there's such a range. So I think having those opportunities for students too, that aren't doing the kind of blockchain Web3 course is really important, and something that universities should be, if they're not already, implementing.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. I don't really have anything to add on that one.
Cool. I suppose that brings us to the overall question then. Are universities a good source of new Web3 talent? Danielle?
Yeah, I'll start there. Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for Web3 companies to kind of mature here and make sure that, we are taking advantage of really strong talent that's coming from universities. But I think there is still a lot of green space ahead of us in order to get there. I know there are later stage and larger companies who have these established university recruiting programs, which great. But for startups and earlier stage companies, I think there's still a lot of room for us to go to make sure that we're able to to bridge that gap and bring people on pretty seamlessly. But at the end of the day, universities are always going to hold really strong talent for a couple of reasons. One, because these are young people and students who are like coming fresh out of a place where their brains are like wired for learning, and they're hungry for that, and they're excited about what's next. And I think that that's always an opportunity to tap into talent that is excited and passionate about, you know, whether the mission of Web3 or a specific company, and to bring them on and essentially like water them and give them the opportunity to grow into their career in that way, I think is great. So I really think it's just a matter of making sure that Web3 companies and these students are able to like matchmake and find each other. But of course, I really believe that university talent is always a really strong advantage for any company to be able to hire when it makes sense for them to do so.
Yeah, I mean, Danielle's brilliantly answered that question. I would just, second the fact that, I suppose, speaking more broadly, the answer for me is yes, because in Web3, we need people who are hungry, motivated, curious, driven by innovation. I think universities are a brilliant source for talent in startups in general, and especially in Web3, because of these reasons, and students have these characteristics, but also students are not bound by traditional thinking. Their style of like seminars and lectures is a bit more creative, so they can, bring a lot of assets to an organization because of that.
And we've already spoken a bit about what you do to engage early careers and graduates, things like sponsoring university blockchain clubs and hosting workshops. But what advice would you give to students and graduates who want to get into the space? Danielle, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, it does kind of follow the pattern of what we've shared a little bit. And so if students can take the fundamentals of Web3, like we've said, community, technology, kind of understanding the use cases, and then really trying to just become, maybe not an expert, but well-versed in those kind of different verticals of the space, I think that's always going to put them at a huge advantage. I see this not only with university students and early career individuals, but I think across the entire like candidate landscape of Web3 is there's always going to be an advantage for the people who are familiar with the space or excited about the space, who kind of understand and grasp the why behind, what it is that we're all here building. Not to say that if you're not familiar with that, like your future in Web3 is done. Absolutely not. I didn't know anything about it before I joined the space when I did. But I think that if you can demonstrate that you've kind of taken the time to really understand the concepts that drive the industry, that's going to be huge. And then I would say the other thing is, because specifically for startups and earlier stage companies, because there are not necessarily these formal university recruiting programs and initiatives, I would say just talk to like founders, talk to recruiting teams, talk to whoever you can at companies that you're interested in working at. Because I personally, have people who I've had in my network for like a couple of years, and then we eventually end up finding a role for them or whatever it is. So I think just kind of expressing your interest, building a network so that you do have people to even, vouch for you if it comes to a point where you need a referral or something like that, that's going to put you at a huge advantage over the hundreds of, other applicants who are going to be cold applying for these roles. So I would start there if I was interested in getting into the space as a student.
Yeah, no, I mean, I second all of that. For me, it comes down to I suppose, top priorities are two things. One is that immersion, really keep engaged in the community, keep up with trends, show that passion, subscribe to those newsletters, listen to those podcasts, keep educating yourself. And the second is the networking piece that Danielle spoke to, because you can make a connection, then 4 years down the line, you could end up, working with that person. So those would be my top bits of advice.
Some great advice there. I think the one thing I would probably add is building a portfolio of your work, whether you're technical or non-technical. Yes, if you're technical, you can get open source contributions on GitHub. But if you're non-technical, think about building a network, contributing to projects through bounty platforms, or building an audience on a social network. These are all things that you'll be able to use to advance your career.
Can I just jump in really quickly?
Yeah, please.
I just really like that you highlighted that, because I think that even for myself as somebody who's typically non-technical, like, I think it is overlooked for folks like us to create portfolios of our work. And when I do see that, it rung like something in my mind, because I've seen a couple of students that we've worked with and engaged who have, even something like a simple website where they have kind of like projects that they've worked on, and these are not necessarily technical students. And that's always like helped them to stand out in my mind, to see like, oh, they're really well-rounded. They've kind of, clearly spent time on a lot of extracurriculars in X, Y, and Z. And it just helps me more than a resume or CV, like, to see what their full experience is. So just wanted to +1 that.
Yeah, I'm going to +1 that as well. I agree.
Yeah, I think also from a non-technical background, having worked in the talent space for the last few years, particularly with young people, the more that you see that they've gone like above and beyond in any way, it makes it much more difficult not to be interviewing them at minimum. So yeah, there's all sorts of relatively small things really that students in particular can do to get ahead. We'll move on and talk a little bit about hackathons now, which are definitely a big part of the industry. For you, Gina, what role do hackathons play as pools for talent when you're searching for high quality candidates?
So transparently, right now, this is not something we're doing, but it's something I very much want to do and open to doing. Absolutely. But so my answer to this is a little bit more theoretical. But yes, I think it is like a great way to kind of search for top talent, a really good way to kind of identify and nurture. Because hackathons create this kind of fast-paced, collaborative environment. Participants can demonstrate technical skills, problem-solving skills, creativity, and alongside, we can test out how candidates code, how they work in teams, their aptitude for innovation. It's like an assessment day, but in a more, informal setting. And I think it doesn't just have benefits for us, like as employers, but for participants too. They can network with industry professionals. They can, get mentorship and resources to kind of help them learn and grow their expertise. So speaking to what I spoke about, like kind of earlier, I think universities should really, as part of courses, like have hackathons kind of built in for these reasons.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there. I think similarly to Georgina, this isn't something that we're formally involved with just yet, but I do think I recognize how it can be beneficial for the reasons that Georgina listed, and just for the reasons that we've talked about leading up until now, which is just showing up as, a community and starting to build relationships with students. And then maybe just doing, lightweight partnerships or sponsorships if you have anything like that available to you at your company, from the company side, and then from the student side, again, showing up and making those connections with companies that are there, with employees that are there, with recruiters, or I don't know how many founders are hanging out at hackathons, but making sure that you're just connecting with people who are in the space and kind of doing what you can to stand out to them. Or at least, making an initial connection and impression so that you can follow up with them later on based on kind of having the credibility of, I met you here and this is what I did. And like, it's just a great, I think, opportunity to, again, bridge that gap between universities and some of these programs and companies.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed.
Me too. And I think, Gina, you made an interesting point that universities should really build in hackathons to their courses, because I think possibly one of the benefits of a hackathon now is that no one's forced to go to a hackathon. People go to hackathons because they enjoy building stuff, and so it's kind of it's another way to stand out from the crowd. Just go to a hackathon, technical or non-technical, join a team and get involved. On that note, are there any hackathons or events that perhaps you're not using right now, but you've come across and would recommend any of our listeners to go check out?
Well, in terms of hackathons, as I kind of mentioned, we haven't started doing this yet, but I would love to kind of hear about what there is out there. But I can speak to kind of some events. I think I've already kind of spoken to kind of blockchain clubs and societies, but events we've also found really good are like tech meetups. And I've done a few in Poland. So we have offices in Warsaw and Wrocław. And developers are based out there, so it makes sense for us to do tech meetups. But we're organizing one with like ETH Warsaw, for example, in March, which is an amazing place to kind of find talent. And we've had Warsaw JS as well. And I'm sure that there is so many different kind of types of tech meetups as well, you know, in different cities. So yeah, I would recommend kind of looking around and seeing what tech meetups there are near you. I don't know, Danielle, if you've got any events or tips.
Yeah, no, I think pretty similarly. Most of the events that I do come across, you know, even digitally when I'm seeing things advertised, are like happening this week or happening next week. So I would just say stay on top of like communities that you're interested in, keep an eye out on event calendars, and try to, you know, even couple times a year, you know, maybe once a quarter, getting out there and showing up to these things, I think is great practice for probably all professionals, but especially early professionals as they're building their networks. So I would just say, you know, poke around, explore online, keep an eye on what you can find, and then just try to show up to a few, even if, you know, you spend an hour and it's not what you were expecting. It's good experience to just get out there and start to meet with folks.
Definitely. I would recommend on the hackathon front checking out ETH Global, Solana Hacker Houses, and I know that Encode Club also do kind of hackathons specifically focused at university students. So check them out. Nice. I guess back to a more university focus. How can universities and Web3 companies work together to create a pipeline of Web3 talent? And what systems can be employed to build need to work pipelines in Web3, do you think, Danielle?
Yeah, absolutely. I like this question because it frames it as like universities and companies partnering together, which I think is something that, you know, we need to be doing more of. One thing that we've started to do in some of our campus partnerships is really connect with professors and starting there. And so I think that can be a really interesting way to, you know, either effectively understand the curriculum, potentially influence it, or, you know, kind of make recommendations on what we find interesting, what we find outdated or not relevant. You know, that can be a little bit spicy depending on whether or not professors are open to that feedback. But I think that just kind of building connections with professors and starting there so that things can kind of trickle down to the students is a great way to kind of get in there. And we found that through our connections and relationships with professors, we've also been able to spend more time with the students themselves. So it's like things like doing, you know, a tech talk or kind of just an informal even conversation with a class one day. We've had our founders kind of share their stories with students before in classes of professors that they know or that are interested in, that are in our network or interested in our product. We've kind of built upon those relationships to spend more time with them on campus in their classrooms. And I think that's a huge way that, you know, we've been able to kind of hopefully help the students a little bit by sharing what we're doing, what our story is, like how we got there. But then also helping the students and the professors see, you know, outside of just the theoretical, like what is happening in the real world. And so I think that's going to be one big way to make sure that like the pipeline itself is A, there, and B, also kind of like primed to enter into the work field when they do get there. And then to dive into the second part, which is around just the systems that can be employed. I think what's cool about a lot of university work is there's a lot of room for creativity. So one thing that we're doing right now at Foundation and Rodeo is we are getting ready to launch a student ambassador program. And to be fair, this isn't necessarily a recruitment lever. This is kind of more of a partnerships lever on our end, where we're working with students to bring our product to campuses. But I think it's a really interesting way for us to, again, build these initial connections, start to get on the ground, even where we can't physically, with these universities who might not have ever heard of our company. And so just starting to plant those seeds of like who we are, what we're doing, why it's cool, why they should care, I think is great for, of course, for our brand as a company. But I think that all Web3 companies can start to do this by just thinking of creative and lightweight ways that they can get on campus in place, or maybe ahead of being able to implement a full university recruiting program, which of course would entail hiring maybe a dedicated university recruiter, doing on-campus interviews, internships, all of that stuff. I think if you're not there yet, starting to find these kind of creative inroads to universities is something that, again, we'll plant the seeds before you're ready to do that.
I mean, brilliantly answered. I don't think I have anything to add. The only thing I'm taking away is that idea of connecting with professors. We connect with blockchain clubs and kind of the careers hubs, but I've never yet, met with individual professors. So I'm now going to do that. So thanks, Danielle, for the tip.
What do you think universities can do to prepare their students and graduates for jobs in Web3, Danielle?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a few different things. Encouraging kind of experimentation, I think, is huge, because there are so many different ways that students can shape their careers. I think Georgina mentioned this earlier, but there are roles in all sorts of functions, of course, across Web3. So making sure that students know that and can kind of, maybe experiment, maybe play around with a few different things in terms of what they like, what they're best at, how they can best shape their studies and curriculum to that career as soon as they can in their educational career, I think would be huge. So maybe it's, starting earlier in their university career rather than in their last year, trying to make sure that they can spend as much time as possible exploring their options and kind of ramping up on, what it is, or narrowing in on what their particular interest will be. And so really just encouraging and giving space for that, I think, is huge, on top of everything else we've talked about in terms of making sure that students are involved in the community to keep up with like the real-time pace of the industry, I think is a big one. Making sure that they have the tools and resources to build connections, to understand the different ways that the space is evolving and might evolve in another, 5 years once they're in full speed in their careers. Maybe sharing some of those projections with them. And then I think also just giving them an opportunity to be hands-on as much as possible. I think this is also kind of echoing something that we shared earlier, but there's, I think this is true for a lot of different industries, but there's only so far that you can get with the theoretical, but kind of throwing them into, the technology, the products, whatever it is, as soon as you can as well, I think is going to create a toolkit that'll help them and make them successful in terms of making that transition in a lot more like of a stronger way than if they didn't get that. And if it was, them kind of reading a book all year or all college career around what blockchain is, and then if you threw them out there, I think that would be a little jarring. So making sure they can get hands-on as much as possible, as early as possible, would be my biggest takeaway.
Definitely, yeah, I completely agree with the hands-on. I think, it's not just sitting in a lecture theatre, like being talked at, it's actually doing. And like secondly what Danielle said, I think universities could like help in those initial days of signposting where students can go. So suggestions for hackathons, suggestions for kind of materials, suggestions for meetups. And then they can kind of then go off on their own and kind of immerse themselves further. But yeah, resonate very much with what Danielle said.
Yeah, I had a few thoughts as well. Encouraging, and a lot of them come down to the experimentation point that both of you just talked about. not just experimentation, but doing that in an open source manner so that you can show people outside of your university professor, I think is very sensible. What will be quite interesting is when universities or computer science courses start teaching smart contracts programming. I think that's beginning to happen, but there's a long way to go. And I just thought that kind of industry projects or partnering with companies in the space and having students work on real world projects for those companies could be really interesting. I think probably not for smaller startups in the space, but for more established players, that feels like it could be worth exploring.
Yeah, definitely. And things like placement students as well as like internships, like having a whole year organization.
Definitely. Cool. We have just a few more questions to go. If you have any questions of your own, anyone watching, please do put them in the chat and we'll hopefully get to them towards the end. I think it will be helpful to talk a little bit more about kind of advice for students and graduates and those early in their careers. So Gina, what 3 things should candidates early in their career do to stand out and give themselves the best chance of getting a job in Web3?
Yes, this is a good question. I mean, my first 2 points will speak to what we've kind of already chatted about, but first one is all about that immersion, staying engaged, staying updated, all the different ways we've mentioned before, from newsletters to podcasts to keeping yourself educated. My second would be the networking piece as well, like we've mentioned, those hackathons, those meetups, those blockchain clubs. And then my third one is, candidates interested, in these product companies as well, like, for example, ours, Ramp Network. Being proactive really makes a difference. So trying out like our product, exploring the user flow and show that you've taken initiative. Like when I'm on an interview and a candidate comes on and tells me feedback on the product, I'm like, oh, wow. And like not just technical candidates, like, for any role, it just kind of shows delving a bit deeper than that kind of first about page on your career site. That really helps stand out. And also just, we've spoken to earlier, the idea of like having, maybe a website with work you've done, not just for technical students, for non-technical as well. Like that again shows that kind of proactiveness and being a bit of a go-getter, which again, really stands out to us when we're looking for our top talent. Danielle, I don't know if you've got any other pearls of wisdom to add.
No, I mean, I agree with everything that you shared. And particularly, I think, the point about when people have used the product and have feedback on it, like that's always a nice moment when you can kind of be like, oh, okay, like you get it, you're into it. And I appreciate that, you spent the extra, whether it was 5 minutes or, an hour diving into things. Like it really does show that they're kind of taking that extra step and is going to do nothing but benefit them throughout the interview process and so on. And of course, obviously, if they eventually join the company, like there's going to be that advantage for them by having started to understand the product early. So I think that's one thing I would definitely recommend.
Great advice once again. And are there any common mistakes that those early in their career make that maybe make it a bit harder for them to get that dream job in Web3, Danielle?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can speak to probably even myself early in my career. And from what I've seen working with other people early in theirs is, I think generally industry-wide is something that people, I think, can do early in their careers is be almost a little too rigid or particular about like what they want to do or where they want to be. It's like, I want to have this title at this company and like that's it. And I think that especially in Web3, as things are changing so quickly and there are so many amazing companies that are doing a lot of amazing work, I think really being open-minded to what's right for you and what you're willing to try. And things might not always be directly related to what you studied, what you majored in, whatever it is. I think that there tends to be hopefully for a lot of people, a really like beautiful path that happens once you get into your professional career that kind of takes you ways that, you know, you might not have been able to predict before. And so I think just like embracing that and kind of allowing yourself to go with the flow and like and explore things that maybe you haven't heard of or that you hadn't thought about can lead to, you know, at the very least some good learnings about what you want next. So I would say just being really open-minded is the biggest thing that I think can help you early in your career to not make the mistake of, you know, being too rigid and turning down potential opportunities or ignoring potential opportunities that could be really good for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much on my end to add. I just think one thing is, you know, for supply is actually more for candidates like for technical roles, but not just to focus on technical skills. You know, we also need to know organization, even in technical roles. You know, we need those strong communicators. We need those kind of project orientated thinkers. We need that business savviness, just kind of showcasing that well-rounded skill set. And I think as well, you know, not adapting to the industry's fast pace. You know, Web3 evolves rapidly. So you've got to be there to continuously learn, experiment. And it speaks to what Danielle said about, you know, be open-minded as well about the role you do and, you know, where your skill set lies. Yeah, that would just be a few key kind of takeaways for me.
And one extra from me is don't get sucked into the hype cycles of you know, it is worth learning the fundamentals and the principles and sticking to it and not giving up when you lose a bit of money on a meme coin or something similar to that. It's pretty usual in the space.
The hype cycle always comes out, so you just gotta ride it out.
Ride it.
Exactly. Final question then, thinking about the future. What do you think will be the biggest driver of talent growth in Web3? Will it come from traditional education, self-taught developers, or grassroots initiatives like hackathons, Gina?
So I believe all three will help. But if I had to kind of choose the biggest driver, I would say that real life kind of experience in Web3 at the moment is most likely to kind of drive talent and growth than traditional education. So I kind of see this coming from the self-taught developers or the grassroots initiatives like hackathons, as we've kind of seen in comparison to these a slower rate of development when it comes to like curricular and traditional education. I do believe as well as kind of this ecosystem becomes even more robust and trusted, that will fuel talent growth. I think people are more inclined to play in a world where there's not this uncertainty and ambiguity, and as more regulation comes in and there's that continuous increase in credibility, I think that will also correlate to a growth in talent in the Web3 space. I mean, my prediction.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Georgina. And I think that's something that is really unique and a positive thing about the Web3 industry in whole is just that you don't necessarily, like, I know we're talking about universities here, and I think, you know, like we've said, universities are going to be a huge gold mine for future Web3 talent. But at the same time, you don't necessarily need to go that route. I think Web3 does open itself to perhaps less traditional, you know, CV and resume backgrounds than industries in the past few decades have. And so I think that that's really cool that we're able to kind of, you know, focus on the technology itself, the mission itself of the space. And I think people who get that either at universities or not are going to be the ones who propel the space forward. So I think that universities are like, you know, another thing in your tool belt that are going to help you get there. But I think that if that's not a reality for you, you can still figure out a way in your early career or even later in your career to find your way into Web3 if you're really taking the time to study the technology, to study the space, to kind of have that that drive. And so for me, that's something that I really appreciate about it as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think we've spoken so much today about community and how together everyone is in the Web3 space. And I think anybody can contribute that, no matter their background, whether they've been to university or not. It doesn't really matter. I think, you know, of course, there's always going to be great people coming from universities as well, but definitely not going to stop you if you didn't go. I have seen one question come through in the comments. How can hackathons better support non-technical participants, so designers, marketers, strategists, to create well-rounded projects? So that's our intern who's checked that at us. Quite a difficult one, I'd say.
Yeah.
A few thoughts. Anyone want to jump in?
I mean, I'm happy to maybe have a crack at it. I think, you know, just to kind of have that more accessibility. I think, you know, having some maybe incorporating some more maybe beginner friendly workshops, or maybe like more mentorship kind of focused ones, or maybe even ones that slightly demystify blockchain concepts could be a good idea to kind of open that door. But also kind of maybe even having ones as well, like more in like design or marketing or product ideation, you know, allowing participants to contribute beyond coding. So yeah, and also, yeah, I think creating kind of multidisciplinary teams and promoting that collaboration as well between technical and non-technical means that everyone kind of has a valuable role. And I think it will not only help those who are less technical, but also those who are, you know, more technical to kind of learn a slightly different skill set. Just top of mind ideas. I don't know, Danielle, if you've got anything else you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea of it. I think that, you know, personally, I would enjoy a talent hackathon where we can just spend some time working on some talent ideas and some work. But I think really just encouraging that for functions that maybe aren't as technical is great. So I would just say, like, share that feedback with, you know, the people in your community. If you are a student, share that feedback with clubs that you're involved in. And maybe you can just, you know, if you're in a marketing club, like just start one and see how it goes and kind of build from there. And I think that, again, that really speaks to the nature of Web3, is that there's so much room for experimentation. There's so much room to like try new things. And so I think that as long as you can find the right connections and the right people to work with, that, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people who would want to build that with you. So I would say take ownership and either give that feedback or, you know, start to do it on your own and see how it goes.
Awesome.
That's about the idea of a talent hackathon. I like this idea.
Yeah.
We got to link up.
I think we might do that. Nice idea, Danielle. Well, thank you both very much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Some very insightful comments and lots of advice to share. So appreciate it. And thank you everyone else for tuning in.
Thanks so much, Callum. Thanks, Georgina.
Thanks, Callum. Thanks, Danielle.